So yeah, I think I didn't really start with photography per se. I actually began mostly with drawing, painting, sort of more traditional media printmaking. I went to school to be an art teacher, actually. So it wasn't really, I think, until university. I had a camera my dad gave me as a graduation gift from high school. It wasn't until I got into university and took a course and started really seeing the possibilities of the darkroom and messing about till the wee hours and you making wonderful sort of playing compositions, etc. It was a lot of fun to the sort of magic of the image suddenly appearing on paper. You know, you didn't have it in the chemical bath and be agitating it and watching it come to life. So it kind of fell in love with it, partly because you can be so almost instantaneous with it, but also because it's very fluid might be a good word for it. I mean, you start off with this image and then you can create all sorts of variations on it. You can flip the lights on halfway through the developing process and flip them off and solarize it and do all sorts of things. It's very experimental. So I enjoyed that, but I don't think I really got serious about photography for many years afterwards. I think it was probably maybe 2003 or so before I really did much else with it other than just messing about in the darkroom. You know, I think it was then that I started actually doing more deliberate image making as an art form. And I'm just trying to think what else I was messing about with in the meantime. But I think it was mostly, yeah, painting, drawing, printmaking, etc. And then with the advent of digital, that changed things again as well. One of the big hurdles with traditional darkroom-based photography for me was always, you know, you'd take a few rolls of film and you'd have to run off and get them developed and et cetera, et cetera. And I didn't have the necessary facilities once I left university to do any of that stuff myself. So I was always depending on others to deal with processing the film and the actual paper and everything too. And so whenever you're making a print or even if you're developing film, there's a certain amount of there's choices you make in terms of how to do that, which results in a different image. You can push the film, you can pull the film, do all that kind of stuff. And so it was kind of like a lot of it was taken out of my hands anyway, so I didn't feel very connected to it. But then with digital, I didn't need all that anymore. I didn't need to deal with the chemistry in the darkroom and all that. And I very reluctantly traded in that lovely camera my dad gave me for a little digital, which at the time was, you know, huge, 3 megapixels. Oh wow! But it was that again, that rediscovering that ease, the almost instantaneous ability to capture an image and then start messing with that in the digital darkroom instead, in much the same way as I was doing it originally with chemistry. And it was a lot of fun. I sort of rediscovered the fun of it. And with tools like Photoshop, you know, you can still do all the same things you could do before, but you can actually do more, and the ability to experiment with very little cost too, because you're not worrying about, oh, have I got enough paper to, you know, try this or that or the other. I don't have the right chemistry with me today, you know, all that kind of stuff. It was just much easier to immerse myself in it. And so I've kind of become a full-on digital convert in that way. Some of the pieces in the show are actually still taken from old negatives, but again scanned and then manipulated from there. So I think that's the sort of logical end state in a way. It's just the digital technology gets you to the point where you can experiment and realize faster. So that's kind of how I ended up there. I guess the reason why photography is my chosen medium nowadays, and really, I mean, photography, I don't know if that's actually quite the right term. It's photographic imagery, yes, because it often starts as a photograph or it is, in the end, output as a print. But I think there's a little bit more to it than that. In the traditional sense of photography, I always think of there's a sense of capturing images, recording events, that sort of stuff. For me, it's not, my interest isn't really in capturing or recording, but it is in making an image. So I guess I draw the distinction between taking an image and making an image. And so for me, again, photography, because it's partly that fluidity, that ease of experimenting and that instant feedback you get by taking the various pieces of the image, and it could be multiple things. So for instance, with these, there's double exposures involved. All right, so there's different images captured in different places. Some of it's in the studio, some of it's on location, and being able to bring that together in a way that I can rapidly iterate through. So unlike with drawing or painting, where there's actually a fair amount of time that has to go into rendering each variation, with this, it allows me to get there faster. I think the other thing I like about it, and the reason why I'm so drawn to it, is because we've always had this sort of trust in photography. Ever since the earliest days of it, it's this sort of wonderful new medium where, lo and behold, we could freeze a scene, a moment in time. But even way back then, I taught a photography history class when I was doing my teacher training. And in the research, I discovered that even, as far back as like the Civil War, for instance, the photographers would actually carry around props with them. They'd carry old muskets and stuff like that, and they'd rearrange corpses and arrange all these props around to make it a better image. And I just love this idea that it doesn't really matter how far back you go. We've always been manipulating the image. We've always been making the image as opposed to taking it. And so a real appeal for me here is that you can absolutely mess with people's perception of what that truth is. And when I say mess, I don't mean maliciously in any way. I just mean that you can fabricate an image. You can create a scene. You can create the moment. You don't have to worry about taking it, capturing it, waiting for it to come along. I mean, there is certainly a great deal of that, but the ability to fabricate it, to construct it, to recompose things in a frame is really quite compelling, because you're effectively taking whatever you can see up here and then making that reality and then outputting it as an actual photograph, as a print, and such that when you look at it, you may think to yourself, is that actually real or is it not? And that's kind of an interesting thing to play with. But also, at a certain level, does it matter? I mean, as an artist, you're able to share whatever perception or reality you want to with your audience, and it's a wonderful medium to do that, because it makes it fairly seamless, right? Instead of, again, with paint, with drawing, with printmaking, there's always there's almost like a layer in between. Sort of there's a translation medium, right? So the oils on the canvas or whatever, they're like a translation of the artist's idea to what the viewer experiences. And don't get me wrong, I love painting, drawing, all that stuff. It's fabulous, and there's something wonderful about the artist's hand. But there's something kind of interesting too about almost hiding the artist's hand in this way. So I think just all in all, it's a fascinating medium to play with. And it certainly doesn't preclude more traditional media as well. I've done a lot of work where I would draw or paint and then scan that in and then start manipulating that digitally, and sometimes even output that again as a print and then draw or paint right onto the surface of the print. And I enjoy that as well, because it brings some of the tactility back too. When you want to have a sense of texture, and any of these prints, they have it by virtue of whatever substrate you're printing on, but sometimes you want that kind of toothiness you get from, say, Conte or charcoal or something like that, and it does make it more personal somehow as well, because then you're no longer hiding the hand of the artist, you're then really bringing it forward. So it's sort of like saying, this is my photograph, and by the way, I've also drawn onto it. I think it's quite satisfying. So I think for me, photography is what I'm currently enjoying doing, and I think there'll always be a component of that, even if it's only a source material. And it's because of that immediacy you have with it. But I think that it's just a tool like any other. I mean, a camera is a paintbrush. It's a bit more complicated than a paintbrush, but it is still just this tool that kind of lets you go from here to in front of your eyes. Yeah, so the show. So this show is my second show here at Dale's Gallery, and the last one was primarily travel imagery. Sort of a lot of images that I took while traveling and then manipulated from there, merged together, that sort of thing. This show is different in that it actually is a collection of some different series I've been working on, and I'm sort of straying further and further from traditional photography, I guess, as I go. So a lot of them are double exposures or are collages or complete fabrications, but they all do start with the same basic components. So I'll go and shoot various things. It might be on location, might be in the studio, and then bring them together, recompose them in such a way that it creates the image that I see in my head somewhere. So the show is the series of series, I guess, and I called it The Floating World, and it sort of came from the Japanese ukiyo-e prints that I really love. I've always been a huge fan of these woodblock prints that were done in the Edo period, and it's one of the series actually takes that as sort of an homage to this art form, where I've taken a lot of these woodblock prints and taken pieces of them out and recolored them by hand and then placed them into different environments. And so it started off with that idea, but the idea of ukiyo-e, the floating world, was this sort of idea of intangibles, this world of ephemeral beauty, of fleeting moments, and to me that this idea of all these different series came together in that same way. They're all just sort of glimpses into directions I'm taking right now, and it sort of appealed to me in that sense. And there's a lot of the ukiyo-e prints, they depicted everything from everyday life right through to the courtesans, through to the geishas and the pleasure districts, and there's that sense of kind of all-encompassingness that I liked as well. So the show came, that's how the show's name came about anyway. And there's a number of different types of print that I'm using here as well. Some are traditional prints on paper, and others are a little bit different, using this new process I've discovered called transmounting, where we actually take photographs that are sandwiched between aluminum and acrylic and create this sort of very floating appearance, because there's no edge to it, there's no frame. It's mounted on rails in the back, so it can actually just sit on the wall and cast a slight shadow around it, and it looks like it's floating there off the wall. So again, another tie into the floating world. And yeah, so that's the show.